Hi, I'm Marcin Kuśmierczyk. Welcome to Eastern Insights. Why does Eastern Europe's perspective on global affairs matter? Because here, history and geopolitics collide in ways that shape our world. Yet these voices often go unheard. This podcast bridges this gap. Each episode translates in-depth analysis from my Polish YouTube channel, Polityka Zagraniczna, which means international politics. For the last few years, this platform has dissected foreign policy, security, and the forces shaping Eastern Europe. Using AI tools like 11 Labs, we adapt these nuanced insights into English, preserving their depth while making them accessible to all. Whether we're unpacking Russia's latest moves, EU debates, or security challenges in Central Europe, our mission is simple: to foster informed dialogue by sharing Eastern Europe's untold stories. If you're curious about the world beyond headlines, subscribe now. Join me as we decode the complexities of global affairs, one Eastern European insight at a time.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're dissecting a recent development in Polish foreign policy, a new treaty between Poland and France. Is it a landmark, groundbreaking historical agreement? Or, as some suggest, a hollow gesture, even raising echoes of past disappointments, like certain historical promises from 1939? With an election campaign always simmering, every international event, every treaty, inevitably gets filtered through the lens of political polarization. But what is this agreement between Poland and France really about? And perhaps more importantly, can France truly become a key partner for Poland on the international stage? Join me as we explore these questions. Following the long-standing tradition here on the Foreign Policy Program, I'm not here to tell you what you should think about this treaty. Instead, I want to lay out the facts, highlight the document's most important elements, and present the different angles. We'll walk through some interesting and significant aspects of the text in a moment. But let's not kid ourselves. Given the context and the remarks from the Polish Prime Minister, the security dimension is absolutely central here. That's where I want to begin. Many are saying this is the first such treaty between France and a country it doesn't share a border with, and in many ways, that's true. However, when it comes to security, it's not quite that simple. The treaty France signed with Poland differs significantly from the one it signed with Germany, for instance. In the Polish-French treaty, the key point regarding security states, and I'm quoting here, that according to the provisions of Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, in the event of an armed attack on their territory, the parties shall provide each other with assistance, including the use of military resources. It goes on to say that assistance and support will be provided in accordance with the obligations resulting from Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty and Article 42, Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union. Now, let's compare that to the corresponding article in the German-French treaty. You'll find references to NATO and the EU treaty there too, but then it adds something more. The Treaty of Aachen, that German-French agreement, is something we actually discussed on this channel years ago. I wonder how many of you remember it. I understand the political desire to portray this Polish-French treaty as something that gives us completely new, ironclad security guarantees. However, as you can see for yourself by reading the articles, and I encourage you to read the full treaty, the link is in the show notes. This treaty primarily confirms the existing allied obligations between Poland and France. It doesn't really go beyond that framework. There's no mention here of providing all means of assistance, which you find in some other agreements. Now, this absolutely does not mean we've been misled, or that this treaty is worthless. The different perception of Germany and Poland from Paris's perspective, especially regarding security, is an obvious and natural consequence of differing geographical realities and completely different risk assessments. And if someone in Poland, driven by that old mentality that Poland must always seek a patron, hope to find a clause in this treaty saying France will now be our mommy, always looking after our security under all conditions, well, that's just not how it works. As we've said many times, we need to move past that mindset. So, if the primary function of this treaty isn't to expand or concretize security guarantees in a new way, what is this treaty really about? Above all, The Polish-French Treaty is a formalization of the cooperation framework between the two countries. It opens the door to deepening relations in a number of specific areas. For example, the treaty mandates an annual summit at the highest level, and in many detailed issues, it requires consultations between the relevant ministries. This might not sound incredibly exciting, but such obligations shouldn't be dismissed lightly. They signal a clear willingness to intensify cooperation in areas that are genuinely important for Poland's future. Let me share some elements of the treaty that I found particularly interesting. Again, I encourage you to read the full text yourself. You'll find it in the links below the video. In European affairs, the language is mostly diplomatic, with promises of consultations. But point 6 of this article caught my attention. It states that Poland and France jointly support both the enlargement and the reform of the European Union. It's significant that these are linked in a single point, showing that these issues at the European level have become inseparable, not just in EU forums, but also in bilateral documents like this. We saw a similar phrasing in the Polish-German Action Plan published last summer. Potential enlargement is now clearly tied to necessary reform. In foreign policy, again, we see provisions for consultation and sharing analysis. This record is also present in the security section. If I had to pinpoint something that surprised me, or that I simply didn't expect, I'd go back to the security field, specifically the defense industry aspect. This seems to have gone largely unnoticed in Poland, but the treaty includes language on defense industrial cooperation. While there are certainly many areas where arms cooperation between Poland and France could be mutually beneficial, I have no doubt that the two countries' perspectives on the debates happening within the EU regarding defense industry support programs must be significantly different. Poland is deeply engaged in cooperation with non-European arms suppliers, primarily the United States, but also South Korea. Meanwhile, the treaty contains wording that, and I quote, "The parties shall promote cooperation between their defense industries, in particular through joint programs, transfers of technology and know-how, and support for exports to third countries." This directly ties into something I've mentioned here before in the context of planned EU programs supporting the European arms industry, the real battle currently unfolding in the corridors of the EU. These programs might partly serve to quickly address gaps in European countries' defensive capabilities, but they are certainly also designed, perhaps even primarily, as a form of industrial protectionism. The goal is to give the European defense industry base a privileged position compared to non-European competition. This is, of course, very important for the largest arms manufacturers in Europe, like France. But it's not necessarily hugely beneficial for countries like Poland that have significant arms contracts with non-European partners. It's worth noting that this point is elaborated on and concludes by stating that implementation will be in accordance with the development of their national programs for obtaining arms. But despite that caveat, Poland agreeing to this kind of language seems to me a clear signal of the direction of discussion within the EU. We can see that this element of industrial protectionism will be a very important part of the programs currently being designed at the EU level. On migration policy, the document combines the key postulates of both countries. Protection of the EU's external borders, including against hybrid threats, and developing cooperation with third countries. In the economic sphere, the parties commit to promoting an ambitious European industrial policy aimed at enhancing the global competitiveness of EU enterprises. Poland and France want to focus on maintaining energy-intensive industries and reindustrialization, while simultaneously reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There's also a postulate for reducing Europe's dependence in the economic realm. Clear protectionist notes are audible in the document concerning future EU policy, particularly EU industrial policy. The term European industrial policy would have sounded quite abstract just a few years ago. Now, words like competitiveness, deregulation, protection of European jobs, and self-sufficiency are directly included in bilateral international treaties. As you know, We've been observing the shifting paradigm in the global economy for several years now. It's fascinating to see how those initial, ambiguous signals have evolved to a point where such postulates are openly stated in international agreements. We're not just entering. We are already in an era where protectionism, targeted barriers, and industrial policy will be integral to the near future of both the European and global economy. An extremely interesting topic for a separate discussion is the relationship between this new trend towards competitiveness and climate policy. Sticking with the treaty, listen to this. In this area, the parties commit to contributing to achieving European climate goals, including the 2030 target and the climate neutrality of the European Union by 2050, in a way that ensures and increases the competitiveness of European industry, while simultaneously achieving social and industrial transformation. The key to reconciling these spheres, of course, is nuclear energy, which has an entire separate article dedicated to it in the treaty. The parties shall implement and develop a bilateral plan of cooperation in the field of nuclear energy in all segments of the sector, in particular through regular exchange and joint work, as well as support the development of their programs. It's no secret that France is very interested in the Polish nuclear program, particularly the implementation of potentially the second nuclear power plant here. We could perhaps be starting to build the first one already, but that's a different conversation. In any case, this treaty builds a very specific framework for cooperation in this area. Before I give you my brief assessment of this treaty, I want to emphasize that these are by no means all the important or interesting aspects of the document. There are other articles worth reading within the areas we discussed, and a whole range of areas we haven't even touched upon, from education and research to technology and digitalization. So, this isn't a complete breakdown of the treaty. That material would be much longer. But I wanted to pick out what seemed personally most interesting to me. So, how do I view this Polish-French treaty? Well, first of all, I think not everything needs to be forced into the category of either a massive, spectacular success or a severe failure. When referencing this treaty, Prime Minister Donald Tusk suggested it would be something extremely important in the context of Polish history. Maybe let's not exaggerate quite so much and maintain a bit more perspective on Polish history. At the same time, formalizing the framework for cooperation with one of the absolutely key countries on our continent, a nuclear power and a very influential player in the European Union, is undoubtedly a beneficial development from Poland's point of view. However, this treaty is not the culmination of a process in which Poland and France have already become key strategic partners. It is merely the beginning of such a process. We can't point to specific areas where, based on this treaty, Poland and France have become key partners for each other. But with this treaty, we open a framework for cooperation, a platform for building something that could become strategically important relations at the European level. It is not the culmination. It is just the beginning. Whether these relations truly grow into something strategic now depends largely on us. Will this relationship remain highly clientelistic, where we pay France, for example, with arms contracts in exchange for vague promises and diplomatic platitudes? Or will it genuinely be a cooperation that helps move European affairs forward, for example, in the areas of nuclear energy or the competitiveness of the European economy? That depends largely on Poland's approach. France and Macron, personally, have much better PR right now than, say, Trump and America currently do. People often describe America's policy as purely transactional. The fact that Macron will wrap everything in beautiful paper, adorned with the most noble values, and that this will be glowingly portrayed by the mainstream liberal media, doesn't change the fact that France also conducts a very strong transactional policy, and that Macron is very much that type of politician. Frankly, anyone who isn't completely naive in international politics conducts a similar policy. Prime Minister Donald Tusk himself, during a speech on economic competitiveness, said something along these lines. Especially the French. I know something about it. I am currently in constant negotiations with our friends from Paris on the issue of the treaty and expectations, what economic exchange is supposed to look like. So it's a good lesson on how to show solidarity and friendship, and at the same time take care of your interests. Negotiations with the French are a good lesson for Poles. Taking into account that Poland's primary concern, repeatedly emphasized by the Prime Minister, was security, and that the treaty's security provisions don't extend beyond the alliance frameworks already established by the EU and NATO treaties. And considering the overall spirit of the document signed with France, I get the impression that there are far more key phrases taken directly from Macron's speeches, reflecting the French perspective on international, European, and global affairs, than from the Polish perspective. Poland's viewpoint is present, but not to the same extent. It seems to me that this opening is largely dominated by the French perspective on international affairs, and Poland didn't quite achieve what it so strongly desired, namely, very specific, hard security guarantees. At the same time, and again, this document isn't the end of the story. It shouldn't be the basis for final judgments about Poland's relationship with France. It's only the starting point for building better, more intensive strategic political relations with a very important country on our continent. There is definitely substance for discussion with France on European policy. The policy of a united Europe, European industrial policy, defense programs implemented through the EU, potential arms contracts, and of course, nuclear energy. There's even talk of nuclear deterrence, although that's a rather nebulous topic today. In any case, France is a key player in virtually every significant aspect of European policy. The fact that Poland, here in Warsaw, also sees Paris as a capital worth consulting at this political level says a lot about Poland's growing position in Europe. Poland's continuous GDP growth is starting to be reflected in its geopolitical standing. When a country like Poland considers major arms contracts or nuclear energy projects, these are things that European powers like France are interested in. Poland is becoming an important element in this equation, which is a positive development. But we must be fully aware that on the other side of this political equation, we have an old-fashioned major power, a country whose elites, I feel, are far more experienced and feel much freer in their political game within the EU and in these types of international relations. My personal assessment of this relationship is that you have to approach the political and economic relationship with France with both great optimism and great caution. What is your view on this matter? In your opinion, can France become an absolutely key partner for Poland in the European and international arena? And how should Poland integrate France into its security policy? Let me know what you think about it. Thank you very much, and see you next time.